The recording has started.
Yep. I'm not leaving, just turning on a few lights. So let me take my badge off from GIA. Just came running from GIA because, strangely enough, my computer there does not have a camera on it.
Oh.
So I remembered that about half an hour ago. I was like, oh my God, I need to go home. So
running. Thank you so much for doing this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do an introduction of you, and then we'll maybe I'll just kind of introduce the topic and say what where Susan started with it, and then you just take it from there, Susan. Okay? You guys discuss.
Okay, but yeah, go ahead and guide with questions if I start to look like a deer in the headlights or Robert's not coming in or.
We can always chat. I was talking to someone yesterday about it, and next thing you know, half an hour went by. So there'll be plenty to talk about.
There's plenty to discuss. So, and I'll give enough context that you can grab onto any of it.
Is this my best face? I don't know.
You always look adorable to me.
Wait, we're being recorded.
Best face forward.
Actually, I love the minute or two after before the session starts because, all right, I'm going to hit start. Welcome back for the last session of the fourth day of the Chicago Responsible Jewelry Conference. Joining us for this session is Robert Weldon. Robert doesn't really need an introduction because we all know him so well, but there are a lot of new community members, and it's fun to recount just some of Robert's contributions to the industry. So throughout his career, he has taught gemology. He worked as a journalist at both JCK and Professional Jeweler. He's photographed some of the most important gem and jewelry collections, and he's one of the best jewelry photographers in the business. He's lectured extensively on numerous gemological issues. He's also been an incredible resource to the advancement of economic justice in gem supply chains, bringing rough gem education to miners. The program that he's worked on with GIA was the Gem Guide project. And I know there were a lot of people involved, but Robert was there for the whole project and has many times been the face of the project. And what they did was they piloted this program of gem education in Tanzania so that miners could learn the value of what they're pulling out of the ground and therefore do a better job of getting more fair value for their effort. And now you're still planning to expand it in Madagascar, Nigeria, Rwanda, and Zambia, aren't you?
Yes, we're definitely hoping to, but with COVID, we all know what's happened. Everything's sort of on ice right now, which is unfortunate because this is the time of greatest need. So, but I'm heartened to know that we are talking about it already.
Good, that's good to hear. So today, with Robert, what we're talking about is a change in terminology. Like, why does that matter? Well, Susan and I talk a lot about this, and Robert's a writer. I'm sure you haven't been in these conversations with us, but I know you've had these conversations about how much words matter. What we label things and call things matters. And when we had our great international aha moment this summer during the Black Lives Matter protests, everybody started, it was late, but okay, we had it. And we need to continue this thought process. But people started saying, oh, wait a minute, systemic injustice there are building blocks for it. Language is one of the building blocks of systemic injustice. Economic barriers are a building block to systemic injustice. There's so many, we can't unpack that whole thing right now, but language matters. And that's when Susan said, oh, there's an issue that's been bothering me that has to do with language and using language to minimize the value of a population. So I'm going to tip it over to Susan now, and you talk about what your concern was and how you ran after it.
Well, yeah, I always felt really yucky, saying the term that is now we're getting rid of, but we'll say it right now, and then hopefully no longer, native cut. And it didn't feel right. And I talked, but then I really, in Virtue Gem, this program that we're doing in in Zambia, we're all about, cutting in country to bring the benefit back. So I really realized when I was told by, one of the big dealers that deals globally, that Zambian, he said, oh, this is beautiful material, but don't get it cut here. Because, I'm like, what do you mean? That's the whole point, is we want to have things cut in country. And he said, well, it's really going to devalue it. And I knew that the cutting was good. I knew that I'd get a good cut out of the stone. And I really was thinking, this is much more than just a yucky term. This is a term that's stealing countries of the benefits of their gemstones. Because, when you go to export legally, a cut stone, you get so much more in, there's geological surveys, there's taxes, and then there's just a higher price of a gem. So we're really like taking the value away from them because this term was stigmatizing an entire area of the industry. So that really kind of was, sunk in, like, we should just do something. There's just no point to having this term anymore. And I talked to Monica Gachui, who was with Virtue Gem, and we talk about all the time. It's just, oh yeah, we've talked about that at AWIMA, the African Women Mining Association. This has been brought up within Africa, but it hadn't really, been, how do you approach something like that? So it's been brought up, and I did some research, and then of course I call you, Andrea, and I'm like, Andrea, let's just change this term. And you're like, well, I said, just write a press release. And Andrea's like, well, you have to do more than that. And I'm like, okay.
Click people and get them on board.
Yeah, it's not that easy.
So I did, I did it. I consulted Martin DeWitt's on here. He's actually, let's come up with the term, traditional cut. And there's Eric Brownward, and I put cutters on there. I put Shelley from, so I put a bunch, maybe about 10 people on that were cutters, dealers, gem people. And everyone, agreed and tossed around some terms.
On is an email. So she sends an email out to this expanded community and says, this is what we should change. And are you on board? And what are your ideas about how we could change it? So, but I think she's putting them on as an email.
Yeah, that's right. Put them on as an email. And then, of course, when I talked to Robert, he immediately got it, wrote up this whole paper on it. In GIA was just on board. They're like,
yeah. On board, Robert. You're an institution, you're a large institution. The speed with which GIA responded to this, and that gives the whole thing validity when GIA jumps on board. So thank you, to Susan, to everyone there who ran after this thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for saying those very kind words. And to be honest with you, absolutely, I've always wondered about that term myself, and I do want to give Susan Jacques some credit, lots of credit, because she really supports this whole movement. I think at GIA we really understand what you were talking about earlier, Andrea, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and how that's changing everything, despite the current moment. Yes, I think words really do matter, and there is no doubt in my mind, I can say it right here and now, that phrase brings up a whole colonial attitude. Mm-hmm. That's basically the way I see it. So when you brought it up, we've been, we have used the term in the trade quite a bit, and so often you just, by proxy, you just use the word because that's the word that has been used, or the phrase. Now, the minute you said it, I realized absolutely we really need to get on board with this. So talk about the power of phrasing. I really had to compose a message that would resonate, and I did so. Susan picked up on it immediately, like you said. So that was the history from that point forward. And I think, Susan, you probably have a lot more to say about it. But I'm very, very happy that we are taking this direction as an industry. I think it speaks volumes for us. And actually, you have to start thinking about all of the words in this industry that really are archaic. There are plenty of them. And they're hard to get rid of. They're hard to get rid of because usage is such a thing that people just use it because that's the thing to do. I think this one is going to be different, though. Here's my prediction. I think it's actually going to stick. If you think of the phrase semi-precious gem, which people tried to get rid of many, many years ago,
And Mom tries to get rid of it. She brings it up a lot.
Yeah. And it should. We should get rid of it. Who are we to say what is precious and what is precious, right? Same thing. But in this case, I think there's more resonance because people are in tune with the movement you talked about, Andrea, and because we're living in a different world now, and also because gemstones that are cut at the source are often very well cut.
Mm-hmm.
So why denigrate it with an archaic term? Absolutely.
There were I want to take one PSA here in the middle of our conversation to say there were a couple of other jewelry industry initiatives to try to change language and ideas that happened around the same time. So Angeli Martinez, who's a participant in our conference, she put out a letter from the BIPOC community just asking the rest of the industry to pay more attention, be more welcoming, better integrate our BIPOC community in the jewelry industry. And then Susan Crow, who always does things so quietly, reached out to Halstead Bead and got them to change the language around their grant application and remove the restriction from people who had a prior felony from being able to even apply. Because again, it is unnecessarily restrictive and exclusive. So there was a lot of activity during this time from some members of the Chicago Responsible Jewelry community that I also want to acknowledge. And we need to keep up this kind of activity. Keep peeling it apart and tackle these issues.
No, absolutely. And after this got started, I went through all of our course materials to see if I could find the word native cut in there. And actually, we don't have it, not in our current course configuration. We have referred to it in a couple of online articles that the author knows about, and it's going to change. But we didn't have it in our course material anyway. And I asked Duncan Pay, who's a VP of Education, Senior VP of Education, to why that is, why we didn't have it there when so many people in the trade were using it. He said because it really didn't describe the stone accurately. And he said also it just felt not right.
Yeah.
There was something not right about it. And also it doesn't describe the stone because there are stones. He said to me, it's really about what the purpose of the cutting is at that point. Is it to retain weight, which a lot of people in the past used to think so? Is it to retain color, which of course is so important in stones? And I know exactly the minute he said that, I thought about a stone that my mom had, which was a kunzite that had a very large belly. It almost looked like, if you turn it around, it could have been a sugarloaf dome. It was that deep. And I asked my mom, I said, why do you have this stone? It's just so weird. She said, look at it from the top. And I did. And the color was just magnificent because you're looking through that whole C-axis of the stone. You're getting magnificent, wonderful color, but it has a very, very deep belly. So what was the cutter thinking at that point? Was he thinking about weight retention? Was he thinking about, were they thinking about color? And, I think that's a valid argument. And I have another story. I don't know if you want me to tell it now. Shall I tell it now? Yeah. I'll tell you now. So I was at a show in Hong Kong, and I visited the booth of Nomads. They are cutters par excellence. I mean, they are just magnificent cutters. The owner is Mikola Kukaruk, and he's well known all around the world for how great his cutting is. So I stopped at his booth and I saw this incredible stone, but it was not his quality of cutting. So I called him over and I said, tell me about this stone. He goes, oh, you found it, did you? And I said, yeah. I said, this is not your standard quality of stone. And you know what he said? He said, I bought it in Sri Lanka. It was a beautiful pink and blue mixed sapphire. Beautiful, bicolored. He said, I bought it because I fell in love with it on the spot. And I knew what that cutter had to go through to achieve this kind of beauty. And I said, are you going to recut it? And he said, absolutely not. I like it exactly as it is. And it speaks to me about source, and it speaks to me about handwork, someone actually doing this work and getting it to this incredible spot. And he said, it's not a bad cut. It's not what I would cut necessarily, but it's a beautiful cut. And so here you have one of the top cutters in the world who said no to recutting it. I thought that's an interesting story to share.
Great story.
That is a good story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of vision to cut into a stone. I can't even imagine. I know we've got some cutters on this call, and what you do to see the possibility inside that piece of rough, and then to take the risk to go for it. It's just...
Yeah, so what we do in our course material is we describe the cut. We don't use those terms. We just say, this cut has a table that's a little bit off center, or the culet is a little off center. It's not proportional in this particular sense, and it has misshapen facets because of this or this or that. So there is no talking about who cut it, where it was cut, or it was just really more a discussion about the cut itself. Now, I think that's good, because as this world gets smaller and everybody communicates, Western buyers are going to communicate with Sri Lankan cutters and say, see this culet, it's a little bit off center. We want you to try to get this a little bit over here. We don't care so much about weight. We want you to try to get this into these proportions. That is the look and cut we're looking for. So, I think it fosters communication as opposed to denigration.
Absolutely.
So somebody refers to a native cut. And of course, as Susan's been pointing out this conference, once we know something, we have a responsibility to it. Now you all know. So somebody says native cut. What do we say to them to help steer them away from that terminology?
Susan?
Well, I think we're talking about the term traditional cut. And that kind of brings back the history of, and this is Martin DeWitt's on here too, and Robert's an expert, and Susan Jacques, that this is the way that stones used to be cut. I mean, there's so many different ways to be cut now. So traditional is like a hand cut that's cut to bring out the beauty of the stone in the eye of the cutter. What does the cutter think is beautiful? So, so if we say traditional cut, it refers to a stone that's not being calibrated, a stone that's, being faceted. We're talking about a facet stone for the most part. So I would steer that way. And another thing that's kind of, I think, beautiful about having the stones cut in country is that, as a jewelry designer, and this is totally in some of these conversations with industry people, I heard people saying, well, this is a bad cut. If it's not calibrated, it's a bad cut. And I heard this is not GIA, this is another group that, another gemstone group that was saying that. But I can go into Tucson and I can see gazillions of calibrated stones. Designers, me, I don't know, we're whatever percentage of the market are. I don't want the same calibrated stone that the designer next to me is buying.
Exactly.
So for me to have a stone that's cut to bring out its own beauty, instead of shaving away something to get something calibrated, that's really important to me, And so, and I'm even learning more about cutting all the time. Like, this indicolite that we're buying in Zambia, the cutter Mukosh is saying, you can't have it cut like that, Susan. I'm like, what do you mean? What, designers are like that, but I want this cut. Well, it has a C-axis going through it. So, all this cutter talk. So I'm learning about cutting, but I'm also learning about the vision and the knowledge and the beauty that a cutter, no matter who or where they are, that's a good cutter can bring to a stone. So I want to see that beauty brought out. I just saw another quick one. This is from Americut on Instagram. So Americut had this clear sapphire, and they had a few pictures of it, and it's bicolored. It was clear, and then it had an orange center. And I looked at it, and I'm like, they got it, because it was perfect. It was like an oval, but right in the middle was the orange part, and that was the only part. I mean, so cool.
Very cool.
Martin DeWitt's on here, and he's saying, an old saying I love is that you can't expect spectacular results by applying cookie cutter methods. But it kind of goes beyond that as well. I mean, a lot of the taste in American jewelry is very Eurocentric. And so we apply really structural Eurocentric concepts to jewelry. So you take, a lot of people will look at prongs like from a Susie Smithers or a Jennifer Dawes, and they'll say, those are bad prongs. Well, do they hold the gemstone securely? Will they last? Then they're good prongs. And as we invite the whole world in to work together on jewelry, we're inviting in a lot of different cultural visions of what beauty is, and we have to be open to that too.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, cookie cutter is one thing, and there is. Thanks, Martin, for saying that, because there is something that takes away from the uniqueness of an incredible piece when everything looks exactly the same. And actually, I think designers in the last decade or so have begun to make use of the fact that things are irregular. The irregularity is what brings it the beauty that it has. So I remember Hans Stern in Brazil had a whole line of gemstones that were put into earrings and other materials that were way off. But the way they were designed and set into that jewelry was just spectacular, and they were selling for, a lot of money. So yeah. I think it's absolutely right. And slight irregularities tell us something too. They tell us that a person has put their time and vision into this piece. Whatever when they looked at the rough and whatever they saw into it. Whether it was, financial gain, whether it was, weight retention, whether it was looking for the color spot, all of that is what goes into it. You have to also understand that rudimentary tools are often used in some places. So, the fact that they're able to bring this kind of beauty to the fore right off the bat, that says something as well.
I wasn't wearing all this jewelry on purpose. I mean, I was wearing jewelry on purpose, but that's every day. But so I have two. I have this cut in Zambia, and that's very, precision cut, perfect cut. And then this, our friend Brian Cook cutting that. So yeah. This one, it's almost like we're bouncing all these ideas back and forth, because I see in Malawi, they're taking their rutilated quartz and they're cutting it into emerald cuts and diamond cuts. And here I am, I'm like, no, look at, Brian just leaves it rough, so it's like now different cutters around the world are emulating each other. I mean, you look at John Noel of Top Notch Faceting, and he starts in what we will now call, he gets inspired in the same way that a traditional cut does. And his cuts are, phenomenal.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're sending them pictures of stuff that they're thinking that doesn't look very cut, if we're communicating across all of these different, cutters from, Malawi, looking at what cutters in the US are doing and just sharing all this information. So there's really a lot of this in the world of cutting. I hope some of the whole thought process is getting antiquated as far as, what's cut.
But I was just before COVID, watching rough get mapped with a laser machine that can tell you exactly how to go after cutting the stone. So there's, technology keeps coming to it, and there's the risk that it all gets more cookie cutter, which is, I'm agreeing with Martin, who's saying it's why he cringes at 3X these days. And it's why consumers are going nuts over older cuts. And if you think about the stuff that Jay at Perpetuum Jewels was showing the other day in the Gem Fair, it's just, they're rich with this cutting thought process that is anything but cookie cutter.
Yeah, no, it's very true, and then especially true in the diamond world, because colorless diamonds that are cut as rounds tend to look very similar all across the board. Mm-hmm. And if you then take an old European cut or a miner's cut, and you look at that, it's a whole different ball game. I mean, in the old days, those cuts were really intended to bring out fire rather than brilliance. And people appreciated them because in the candlelight, they would see these big flashes of fire. So all of that has changed. Precision cutting, I think is definitely a movement that we will never not have, and I think it's good for the industry too. Mm-hmm. But there's certainly a place for all of the cuts. I think giving back to the source and buying from the source also gives a retailer a hell of a nicer story to tell the rest of the world than something that's just been cut quickly in a factory in Bangkok.
Yeah, another halo. I mean, that's really not a story that a lot of consumers want to hear. It's like we have much better stories to tell.
Much better stories, yeah, absolutely.
So back to native
terminology to tell them with.
Mm-hmm.
A new terminology. Yeah. So,
being traditional, is that what we're saying, or does it depend on what they're referring to? Somebody holds this up and says it's a native cut. Do we have to know something more about this stone before we can say, I think we're calling that or are we saying, hey, native cut's a term that's not even in GIA's terminology. It's not real. So we're calling it traditional cut? Like, I want to make sure the audience leaves knowing what to say.
Yeah, I think traditional cut, and we're not referring to origin. I think we need to know the origin of the gem. Say it's cut in the country brings more value, but I don't think that, the cutting origin has a terminology besides just cut in country. So yes, I would say traditional cut. Robert, is that correct?
Well, it's interesting. I asked Duncan what he felt about that term because I had wondered what the epilogue of these conversations had been, whether they had arrived at an alternate term. And you and I had discussed about the idea of using the word traditional cut or the phrase. When I mentioned that to Duncan, he said, I don't think it describes the stone either. I don't want to relitigate this entire conversation. There's no way I want to do that. But for GIA's purposes, probably we won't use that phrase. We will use neither of them. We will just describe how it's cut, clinically. These are the issues that it has. It has some facet abrasion here, misshapen facets over there. That's basically what we'll do. Or we will say, here the facet junctions meet perfectly. The stone is well in balance. Its depth proportion is excellent in relation to the face-up appearance of the stone. All of those things are working out. So that's more how we will describe it. Slightly more technically than that, I'm sure. But
so we'll be left with either calibrated or non-calibrated stones.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, we just won't broach I think we won't broach the whole idea of traditionally cut, because again, what does that mean? What does it actually say about the cut?
And maybe because I can see myself discussing a diamond with someone, and if they say native cut, which I've certainly heard, to say that's not really a term.
Yeah.
That's a term that's been being discarded by the industry. Let's talk about it in terms of its qualities. But native cut doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah, that's pretty much how we've been seeing it for a while anyway. I did a search through the course PDFs, and I didn't find one use of it anywhere. It's not to say that we haven't used it somewhere in the various things that we write, and so we'll be vigilant about not using it further, and trying to correct it when we have used it when we can. So. I sort of personally, I rather like the phrase traditionally cut. I think it has a nice ring to it, and it doesn't sound derogatory.
Mm-mm.
I just don't want it to go there. I don't want traditionally cut stones or that phrase to suddenly be viewed as stones that don't face up well, that have certain issues to them.
Yeah.
And it raises, so Martin's raising the other issue that I think is still part of this conversation, which is the terminology also begs the question of how to change a colonial attitude toward actually improving cutting standards and equipment and knowledge at the source. Because again, it's an academic thing.
It really is. But I think a lot is changing. A lot more needs to change. But the places that I've been to recently in Africa, I've seen I've seen stones that are cut beautifully. I mean, absolutely beautifully, and I would buy them without hesitation, just because they look good to me, you know, and they've been hand cut, they're well proportioned, they look great. So I think it's the same in any industry. There needs to be communication between the seller and the buyer. This is what we're looking for. I'm going to help you get to that point by trying to teach you these particular aspects of it. There needs to be more of that. And do you need a new cutting wheel? Are you going to need other types of equipment to reach this standard? Let's see if we can help you in some way. I think that needs to happen as well.
Wendy asks,
your phone's going to ring off the hook, Robert, starting with me tomorrow morning.
Consider yourself forewarned, Robert.
Oh no! Are you getting a lot of chat questions?
Well, Wendy's asking what the former definition of native cut was. It wasn't it was never defined, Wendy. It was just used as a way to say, oh, it's a cut that is a stone that was cut in country, and usually not one of the European or more common jewelry cut countries, or in one of the labs, or it's a derogatory term that had no definition. Do you think? I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think. But when I started Googling it, I saw this is also not besides the fact that I love Robert. I knew he'd have a good take on this, and then Susan Jock immediately took it up. But when I Googled it, everyone did have it listed online, at least. I don't know in the books. And I think ICA, AGS, everybody had something about it. But the only one that described it as clear as what we would consider as, formally known as native cut was GIA talking about, and they in your online, it specifically did say cut to bring out the beauty of the stone and retain the good color, or to retain the weight. So that you were the only source online that I could find that mentioned that a cut could be specifically, to save a color.
Yeah.
You were the only one that listed anything positive at all.
Yeah. No, I think that was a series of articles on cutting. And I think the term came up simply because it was a used term at the time. I can say in our course material, it isn't. It does not exist. I've not seen it, and I've looked pretty thoroughly for it. Maybe it's out there somewhere, but I certainly have not seen it. And after this conversation and after this wonderful action that has been taken, it will not appear. So, yeah.
So we have to spread it throughout the industry now at the trade shows when we go to buy, and we'll just have to be kind of nitpicky people and say, I'm sorry, please change your terminology today. We won't have to do that with everybody, but.
And I think, there's a way to communicate anything. Yeah. So, this is an archaic term that we've decided as an industry does not really show cuts from different countries in a very good light. And we sort of feel that it has a colonial tinge to it. So we're going to move away from it. But other industries, other associations that need to embrace this is the ICA, CIBJO. Those are organizations that, Susan, you may want to reach out to.
I will.
And, maybe Doug can help because he knows a lot of the people in those organizations. So I think that would be helpful.
Will do.
Anything I can do, obviously, stand at the ready to help.
Thank you.
Well, with GIA behind it, that's a huge help. Just being able to say it doesn't show up in GIA's educational literature, and they're scrubbing it from wherever else it might appear. That gives gravitas to the issue. So again, thank you.
Yeah, again, I have to turn all of that back on Susan Jacques, because I got an answer back from her in probably 4 minutes. So she's immediately on board. She immediately understood the issue, and I'm proud of GIA for taking these strong stances in things that are just not right, that need to change. So,
The power of words.
The power of words.
But I want to share this thing that Jared posted in the chat. He said, precision cut and source countries are not mutually exclusive. Witness
Exactly.
rebellion Madagascar. As a dealer with a safe full of wonderfully wonky, oddball, antique color stones and diamonds, who loves them deeply as they are, I do understand efforts where cutting is being taught in skip some of the less precise jam-peg methodologies. I wish I could say this like Jared would actually be saying this. And teach more toward precision cutting, which doesn't mean calibrated. And that is important, it doesn't. Because quite simply, they sell more easily and for more money. If we're interested in maximizing value addition in source countries, better cutting, even girdles, finer polish, et cetera, do yield higher returns.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So if you describe a stone as it is, that's all you're doing. And I think that's a good way to approach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our time is up.
Oh, no. Wait a minute. This has been so much fun.
It has.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for dashing home so you'd actually have a camera.
Yeah, thanks for signing on. Being part of everything. It's great.
Well, I'm off to another Zoom call in just a little while, but I'm sure how is the whole program going? I'm hearing good things.
It's been phenomenal. We have had very few technical problems, and the ones that we have had, we were able to laugh at as a group. We have over 550 registrants. They kept rolling in as the days
went
on. Yep.
That's excellent.
And great conversations, and people are going back to the replays, and there's live chat there. So we've got conversation still going on.
Yeah.
Been a good week, and the participation and like our chat boxers here, they're amazing.
Yeah, excellent. I'm beginning to see those questions. Very good.
Very good.
All right, you guys. Well, Robert, you when I see you, have fun on your next call. And to our Chicago conference gang, we will see you tomorrow. We are starting tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central Time. I know you guys aren't used to Chicago time, but Susan and I are Chicago. 1 p.m. Central Time with Tim McCrate, who's going to talk about his Toolbox initiative. And you really don't want to miss this. He's been flying under the radar with it for years. Tim is an industry gem, and you just really want to show up and see this happen.
Yeah. I've seen his video online. It's on YouTube. Amazing.
It's amazing.
Mind blowing.
Yeah. Very excited to have him on.
Yep. So
all right.
Start with. Thanks everyone. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.